Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We are building the entire economy completely from the ground up. If you've ever watched the news and felt, totally overwhelmed by inflation figures, sudden interest rate hikes, or those massive government spending debates, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get right into it. So let's dive straight into the ultimate economic problem. This is basically the core engine of everything we're going to talk about today, scarcity. Think about it. Human wants are absolutely unlimited, right? But the resources we actually have to fulfill those wants, they're strictly finite. Because of this unavoidable reality, choices simply have to be made. Who gets what? How are resources used? And how do we distribute them optimally across society? To demystify all of this, we'll be covering scarcity and opportunity cost, the circular flow of income, understanding aggregate demand, fiscal and monetary policies, and finally, Keynesians versus monetarists. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, scarcity and opportunity cost. Scarcity literally forces us to make a choice. Picture a startup with a really tight budget. Hiring a brand new software engineer means they absolutely cannot spend that same money on a massive marketing campaign. This right here is opportunity cost. It's the value of the next best alternative that you had to give up. And it applies to every single level of society. It's businesses choosing between, say, expanding their workforce or upgrading their machinery. It's governments deciding whether to spend finite tax dollars on a new healthcare initiative or fixing infrastructure. With every single choice, there's always a hidden cost. Moving right along to Section 2, the circular flow of income. At the very foundation of our economy, we've got this continuous, closed loop between two main actors, households and firms. It's pretty straightforward. Households supply what we call factors of production. Think of things like their labor to the firms. In return for that labor, firms pay them wages, rents, or dividends. Then, what do households do? They take that income and spend it on the exact goods and services produced by those same firms. It's just a continuous loop of income and expenditure. Quite literally, one person's spending is another person's income. But as we know, the real world isn't a perfectly closed loop, is it? The engine gets a lot more complex when we introduce withdrawals. This is money that actually leaves the immediate domestic flow, like when you put money into personal savings, pay taxes, or buy imported goods. On the flip side, we have injections that pump money back into the system through things like business investment, government spending, or exports. Now, for the economy to reach a state of equilibrium, the rate of these withdrawals has to perfectly match the rate of injections. To put that into perspective, countries like the UK usually have low savings rates but super high consumption, whereas countries like Japan have massive savings rates, which then funds a huge level of internal investment. It's a real balancing act. That brings us to Section 3, understanding aggregate demand. So, to measure the total output of this economic engine we've just built, economists use a really critical metric called aggregate demand. Basically, aggregate demand represents the entire amount of expenditure flowing through our circular engine. It highlights the vital relationship between the real output of a country and the overall price level. In plain English, it essentially asks one massive question: how much is absolutely everyone in the economy willing to buy right now? We can actually break this total demand down into 4 distinct pieces. First up is consumption. That's everyday spending by households, and it usually makes up the lion's share. Second, we have investment. This is driven by firms buying capital, like new machinery. This one's highly volatile and swings wildly based on business confidence. Third, add in government spending on public services and infrastructure. And finally, net exports, which is just the difference between what a country exports to the rest of the world and what it imports. Put them all together, and you get aggregate demand. Now, when there's an increase in any of those 4 components we just talked about, say, a huge surge in consumer confidence where people start buying more, or maybe the government launches a massive new infrastructure project, the overall aggregate demand shifts outward, which expands national output. And here's where it gets really cool. Because of something called the multiplier effect, an initial injection of spending can actually lead to an even bigger final increase in national income. Why? Because that new money continuously circulates from person to person. It's like a domino effect of spending. Next up, Section 4, fiscal and monetary policies. Okay, so what happens when this economic engine starts running out of steam, or worse, starts overheating? Well, policymakers have 2 main tools to smooth out the bumps. First is fiscal policy. This is managed directly by the government to influence aggregate demand using taxation and public spending. The second tool is monetary policy, and this one is controlled by an independent central bank. They step in and manipulate short-term interest rates and the money supply, essentially making borrowing either cheaper or more expensive for the entire economy. Let's look a bit closer at that fiscal lever. If the government decides to step in during a recession, they might ramp up public investment, filling potholes, building a new energy grid, funding hospitals. This injects money straight into the circular flow and boosts aggregate demand in the short term. But there is no free lunch here. It comes with serious trade-offs. To fund all this, the government might have to hike up taxes or borrow heavily. And if they borrow too much, that can drive up interest rates, which ironically discourages private businesses from investing. Economists call this phenomenon crowding out. Historically speaking, we usually only rethink how to use these levers when monumental global crises completely force our hand. I mean, the sheer misery of the 1929 Great Depression completely shattered the illusion that markets just automatically fix themselves. Post-World War II, active demand management became the absolute norm. But then, the 1970s hit us with stagflation, high unemployment mixed with high inflation, which broke those post-war models and brought central banks into the spotlight. Fast forward to the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 pandemic, and we saw a massive return to heavy government intervention, with unprecedented stimulus packages and huge asset purchases. Which brings us to our final topic, Section 5, Keynesians versus monetarists. All this history leads right into a massive philosophical debate over how the economy actually works and what the government's role should be. On one side, we have Keynesian economics, born from the ashes of the Great Depression. Keynesians firmly believe that aggregate demand drives output in the short run. They argue that the private sector can be pretty inefficient and prone to panic, so the government literally must step in as a spender of last resort during recessions. On the exact opposite side is monetarism, famously championed by Milton Friedman. Monetarists argue that excessive government intervention actually destabilizes things. They focus hyper-specifically on the money supply, arguing that if you pump too much money into the system faster than you produce actual goods, you are guaranteed to get inflation. They prefer predictable, strict rules led by central banks. The Keynesian view creates a really fascinating dynamic when it comes to inflation. If an economy has spare capacity, meaning you have unemployed workers and factories just sitting idle, you can massively boost aggregate demand and increase output without causing any inflation. The price level stays totally flat. But once you hit full employment, the economy's running at its absolute limit. Pumping more money in at that point doesn't magically create more output. It literally just sends prices skyrocketing. Further spending just drives prices up, plain and simple. So there you have it. We've built the engine from the scarcity of a single coin all the way up to the massive levers of global policy. Now I want you to look at the news around you. The next time your central bank announces a rate hike or your government unveils its latest budget, ask yourself, which of these levers are they actually pulling? And ultimately, who is paying the opportunity cost? Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you.